Welcome to episode 515 of the Brainy Business, Understanding the Psychology of Why People Buy. In today's episode, I'm excited to introduce you to Skye Waterson, founder of Unconventional Organisation. Ready? Let's get started.
You are listening to the Brainy Business Podcast, where we dig into the psychology of why people buy and help you incorporate behavioral economics into your business, making it more brain-friendly. Now here's your host, Melina Palmer.
Hello, everyone. My name is Melina Palmer, and I want to welcome you to the Brainy Business Podcast. When I talk about mindset work and applying behavioral science into your habits to be more productive, one of the most common questions I get is about how this all applies to those who are neurodiverse, especially those with ADHD. I have had a previous guest, Skye Hale, talk about ADHD within teams and how to optimize them by showcasing the value that each type of brain brings to the group. Today, my guest, Skye Waterson, and I are focusing more on that productivity factor. She is going to be sharing about the 4 main areas where ADHD brains are different from neurotypical, including their response to dopamine when it comes to goals, how they experience time, and other fascinating insights. And we're going to talk about tips for those who have ADHD so they can optimize their own work and life to be more productive, as well as how this comes into play when the leader of a team has ADHD, and a little bit about optimizing the workplace with consideration to those differences. It's fascinating, and I can't wait to share this conversation with you. A little bit about Skye before we jump in. She is an ADHD strategist and founder of Unconventional Organization, a multi-6-figure business helping entrepreneurs turn ADHD into their greatest asset. When she was diagnosed with ADHD during her PhD, she realized that mainstream productivity advice didn't work for her. So she took matters into her own hands, researching, testing, and perfecting strategies that truly help. Today, she equips coaches, consultants, founders, and executives with the same ADHD-friendly systems, which I'm excited to have her share with you here on the show today. Last thing, before we get into the conversation, want to be sure you know there are links in the show notes for my top related past episodes and books, ways to get in touch with Skye and myself, and more. It's all within the app you're listening to and at thebrainybusiness.com/515. Now let's jump right in. Skye Waterson, welcome to the Brainy Business Podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Oh, yes. I am so excited to be chatting with you today. I think it's going to be a great conversation, definitely on a topic that I get questions about a lot. And there are, I feel like, less people working on this specific area than what we might think. And so really delighted that you had connected and that we were able to work this out. So for everyone that's saying, like, what is this area? What are we talking about? Like, for everybody who doesn't know you yet, can you share a little bit about yourself and the work that you do?
Yeah, so I am a former academic. I was diagnosed with ADHD during the first year of my doctorate. So I made it all the way to doctoral level with a lot of burnout and a lot of really excessive systems and a bunch of other bad coping mechanisms. And so when I found out I had ADHD, it was a real turning point for me. I started researching, couldn't help it. That's what I do. And, teaching, what I was doing in schools, and eventually founded the Unconventional Organisation, which, is what I now run today. And we actually help business owners and executives with ADHD.
Perfect. Well, and always love I had this, and as you're working through it, you're figuring out ways that you can be helping other people. So what did you get your PhD in? What were you researching at the time that you were, in that?
My biggest frustration is that I got my diagnosis at the beginning of my PhD and not before it, because what I was researching was nothing to do with what I'm doing now. I had studied, spot the ADHD here. I studied psychology, sociology. I did, developmental psychology, which did discuss ADHD and autism, but it was mostly in kids. And so when I got to postgraduate or, PhD level, I was studying parents' experiences of economic satisfaction in New Zealand. Something fun, but not related to the topic.
Yes, but learning to research and dedicate and focus your time. It's interesting. There's a lot of the So research, when we think about optimism bias and some planning fallacy. So we talked a little bit leading into this conversation about my TEDx, about, there's nothing magical about Monday, these 4 kind of things that keep people stuck in their status quo, including optimism bias, planning fallacy, time discounting, and bike shedding. But with the research that has to do with that optimism bias, it's talking about students who were doing their dissertations. And when you ask them how long they thought it would take for them to get the work done, and I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but, they said it'd be, 24 days or something. And then it'd say, like, in the best case scenario, how long do you think it'll take you? And they said, I bet I could do it in 14 or whatever. And then the worst, if everything goes wrong, how long will it be? And they said, 30 or something. And then it actually took them an average of 55 days, like way more. So everybody kind of gets stuck, I guess, in that way, and where we overestimate or underestimate how long it's going to take us, overestimate our own skills. So would you say that the work you were doing, like, were you kind of self-testing as you were going through your own, PhD, and kind of working on yourself and learning some of these things of how to apply, even if the research you were doing wasn't connected?
Yeah, 100%. So I would say, for me, when I got the diagnosis, I had kind of a bit of a split at that point, because my PhD was by scholarship. I was lucky enough to do well enough in my master's that I got a scholarship. Actually, if those of you want to know the story, I talk in some article about how I dropped out and went and worked in a bakery for a year because I was so burned out. So once I'd been through that and art school and a bunch of other things, I came back to do the PhD. And I was like, okay, I'm going to figure out what it is. If there's something wrong, I thought it might be dyslexia. When I found out it was ADHD, for me, it was really like I had to figure this out. This was like, it just felt like almost like a calling. I needed to understand what was going on. And so I immediately started researching it. I immediately ran a postgraduate group for people who have neurodiversities, because I've been running groups and teaching, for yonks at this point. And so it just felt supernatural. And I ended up actually writing articles which had references in them, which I didn't realize at the time was kind of a big deal, because that wasn't happening a lot, and posting them on like Facebook groups of ADHD groups that I was a part of, and like that kind of thing. And that's really where I got traction and attention that then led into what I'm doing today. And it sort of culminated, I used a lot of the systems that I developed over the next few years to write my thesis, and, do the research and testing. But I ended up in a position where I actually didn't finish my PhD, and I went and studied the business full time. Because if you're in academia, those of you who've done a PhD will know there comes a point where you have to just give everything you have to that process. You have to focus and do one thing. And, the advice I got from my supervisors was, there's always going to be another PhD, but you're not going to get this opportunity again. And so I went full in on the business, and that's how it turned out.
Awesome. And I love, being able to have understood what mattered to you at that point and what it was you were looking to do. And like you said, if you had been studying something that was tied to what you then became passionate about, it might have been different, right?
Yeah. But it was the scariest decision I've ever made. I was fully on the academic train. That is what I had studied for since I was in high school, basically. I'd been going through this process. And so to sort of throw myself into the world of business was very scary. But ultimately, I run a multi-six-figure business now, and I love it. And I'm glad I made this decision.
Yeah, I love that. So as we kind of dive into the insights and what you help people with and whatnot, I mentioned that I get questions about this a lot from people. So we found some synergies, like we're saying, in the advice I give and how it ties in with the work that you do.
Yeah.
And, in this space of like, do one thing, because our brains aren't really good at multitasking just across the board. Like, we could all do better in that way. And then knowing, though, that there are, some things that are different going on in our brains, of course, for those with ADHD or other diagnoses, but understanding what that is and helping people. I get people that ask all the time, like, how does this apply? So if I have ADHD, diagnosed or not, or I'm whatever I'm dealing with, if I'm neurodivergent, what's different for me?
Yeah.
Like, so what would you share for that?
I think there are a number of key differences. I would say dopamine differences in how we, receive dopamine, and we can go into the dopamine transfer deficit. But, there's also issues around time blindness, working memory, and then transition times, otherwise known as set switching. Those are kind of the key points. Ironically, you won't actually see them a lot in the DSM, except for one tiny byline, because the DSM really focuses on this idea of impulsivity, which is a factor. But when people come to me, usually they're struggling with more of the executive functioning side.
Well, I definitely want to go in depth on all four of those things. So let's go. You started with a dopamine piece, so let's jump in on that. And I thought this was so fascinating. So please share a little bit about that.
So this is an interesting space. And I will say, if anyone knows send me the research on this. If you find a paper, just send it to me, because I love this stuff. I'm just always trying to learn more. But there's a paper, specifically, I think most well written by Tripp and Wickens in 2009, if you do want to find it, where they talk about this idea of dopamine transfer deficit theory. What that essentially means is that it is theorized based on what we're looking at in the brain, that when a neurodiverse person, somebody with ADHD, starts a task, they don't get a little dopamine boost at the beginning in the same way as somebody who is neurotypical or doesn't have ADHD gets. So the way I like to describe it is, if you're neurotypical and you sit down to start a task, your brain goes, hey, this is going to be great. You're going to get a reward later on for this. So let's just give you a big thumbs up now and say, whoa, good job. But if you're ADHD and you start the same task, your brain just looks at you and goes, this is stupid. This sucks. Why are we doing this? And so you're less motivated. It makes a lot of sense when you explain it like that.
Yeah. For sure. And so it's so fascinating, because we talk about that with goals and being able to see, this is what's going to happen. And so we get the little bit of dopamine, and there's one piece in the way of not just resting on the dopamine laurel you get at the beginning, being one aspect of it, but knowing that that is a key to completing the task, right? To help us to see that this is something worth doing, that we get that bit of dopamine. And so what's your advice, for someone who does have ADHD to help to overcome that so that they can, focus on those important tasks and get them done?
Yeah, well, my advice, and I've tested this on hundreds of people at this point, including myself, is what I call the dopamine dial. So, basically what I advise people to do is to imagine, their brain has got a big dial in it, one of those old school ones, and start giving yourself a reward for starting the task, a good reward. I like to put on some music, that's kind of a later thing. I think I'll start by grabbing a coffee, sitting down, watching Twitch, watching people play Stardew Valley, which is my favorite game, and kind of going through and then maybe listening to a podcast, and then maybe listening to music. And so, what I'm doing essentially is I'm giving myself a dopamine boost for sitting down at my desk to work, which is so foreign. And you think about it from a neurotypical perspective. If you're getting a dopamine boost for starting the task because you're going to get a reward at the end, the idea of then giving yourself a reward for starting the task as well feels inane. It doesn't make sense. But if you're neurodiverse, if you have ADHD, this could be the thing that helps you actually do the thing. If you want the full, I break it down step by step in a full article. You can always just email me or text me, Brainy, on Instagram at Unconventional Organisation, and I'm happy to send it to you. I love giving this to people. But yeah, just really how to go down the steps of giving yourself a reward, which to a lot of people is just a foreign concept.
Definitely. Well, and the aspect of the dial being in the order you were putting there, right? So the, streaming on Twitch, there's a lot more, dopamine coming from that of the action of it and are they going to make it? And this is interesting. There's visual and all the stuff. And so if you then once you've had that for a little bit, you dial it down to just the podcast, right? So the visual aspect is gone, but I'm coming off of that big kind of hit of dopamine to then get the next, like you were saying, to some music. So, and maybe it's not high energy or whatever, different type of music to help you. And I know like in your article too, you're saying kind of along those lines, if you maybe make a couple notes about the thing you're trying to do, right?
Yeah, work your memory sport there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So as you dial down the intensity of the dopamine that you're getting, you're factoring in and kind of leveling up the work that you're getting done to help accomplish the task and tie the benefit from the dopamine to the completion of the task kind of as you're making some progress there.
Exactly. And what that allows you to do is it allows you to get back to what we were talking about right at the beginning, which is the idea of doing one thing at a time. Because we do want you at the end of the day to be sitting there with maybe a little bit of background music, because there's some research that indicates that actually helps us stay in focus. But, you know, something like that. But really just doing one thing. It's just how we get there. That's kind of the biggest difference I want you to imagine if you're, you know, if you have ADHD or you think you might have ADHD. It's just how you get there might be different from somebody else.
Definitely. And so I'm guessing there'll be, you know, I'm thinking for questions for the audience members might have here. So is there a set amount of time that you should target for how long you stay in each one, or how quickly you're going to be, you know, ramping your way in? Is there a goal that you're trying to achieve and to be able to transition in, you know, a month from now, I can do this in 5 minutes versus an hour and a half that it takes me today? Like what are some of the things about that?
So this is really part of a full step into focus routine that I teach. This is kind of step one. And, you know, what I usually say, because you're right, I get this question all the time, is most of the time you should be able to do this in about 15 to 20 minutes. But if you're just starting out, think about how long you've been procrastinating a task in general at this point, because sometimes people will procrastinate for hours. And let's just imagine you could halve that time. And let's go with that, you know. So sometimes people, especially because it can feel a bit like driving a car, it's like the first time you do it, it's a little bit clunky. It doesn't feel supernatural. Once it becomes a part of your brain, and a lot of the times when people come to me and work with me, they say they really love it. It's not tips. It's a system that you can work, sort of like a practice. Once it becomes part of your brain, you'll start doing it without even thinking about it. And that's when it starts to become faster.
Yeah. And that kind of, whether it's habit or ritual around it, right? But your brain then can be anticipating the next thing, right? And being excited about what it's going to get. And you can be your brain's going to get kind of bored and want to switch tasks anyway. Right? Yeah, and so you might as well say, we're now switching to the podcast, because that's like kind of feeding into that aspect of it.
Yeah. And trusting. Oh, it feels so good when your brain trusts yourself. It's such a good feeling. Right. Because right now your brain probably doesn't trust you. It sounds strange, but think about it. It's probably true.
Right. Yeah. That's interesting. And so what about something like, taking breaks then, right? So we know we're going to get distracted, all humans, right? You're going to get distracted. And so there are things where whether it's like Pomodoro techniques or being, you know, so it's maybe just for those who aren't as familiar, if it's say after 25 minutes, you take a 5-minute break, or after 50 minutes, you take the 10-minute break and can do something. I talk about that kind of not yet when I'm thinking about, I want to go check Instagram and say, like, well, I get to do that in 15 minutes when I'm done with this, right? But is there any sort of guidance as far as where something like that is actually going to be bad if you work in too many breaks when it takes you longer to kind of get your goals going?
Yeah, I'm about to say, I'm going to be a little bit controversial here because
do it.
Okay, but I have research to back it up. So the Pomodoro method is awesome, but it's not designed for ADHD or people with executive functioning deficits. It was designed by somebody in Italy who was trying to study. It actually also works really well for anybody in a study framework, because you're always hyper-focusing sort of for a whole day, often on one thing. But in the sort of day-to-day, you know, business kind of life, what we tend to see with this is that, you know, we struggle with transition times and set switching. So if you go 25 minutes of work, 5-minute break, 25 minutes of work, 5-minute break, your brain will like, what tends to happen is people will say the Pomodoro really helps me start, but then I tend to turn it off once I've started. And that's usually an indication that you're using it in a different way. So what I tend to recommend is that you stretch the Pomodoro. So we don't get rid of it. It does work, but we say, okay, I'm going to work for, maybe 45 minutes with a 15-minute break. We just want to give yourself, I tend to even say half an hour. Like, it depends on how long you can work at a stretch. And again, stepping into focus can really help with this, especially if you do the whole system and you write down the tasks so you're not distracted by the fact that you don't actually know what you're doing. But, if you can take a really nice long break after a good chunk of work and then do it again, that's going to be just a much more natural way to get in and out of focus with ADHD.
Definitely. And I think in that way too, is it a little bit of, I don't like when you have if people use a kitchen timer or something and then it's going to go off and be like, hey, like your time is up. Which, like, you don't want to be taken out of flow if you were in flow and introduce the distraction, right? So you want to have something that will stop you if you're going to go way too long, but knowing when it's an alarm that has a sound or does something, and when it's just, this is the method to get me started, and have some willpower to know that if I need a break in 10 minutes, I can have one. But if I don't, and I can like work through it, it's good, which feels like a good kind of natural transition into time blindness.
Yes. Yeah. And it's funny with, we talk about timers. People are often really surprised to know that I have like 2 timers that go off in the daytime. And that's about it. 2, maybe 3. I have like this is the absolute, like, if you've slept in, this is the time you have to wake up. Like that one, that's in my office. And then I have the end of the day, you should probably leave your computer. And then I have like, you should go to bed. Like, you need to start getting, like, those are the only ones. Like, everything else I do is using this really nice system of, it doesn't have to beep at you all day. Because, to your point, we do struggle with time blindness. We see a lot of research into this. I was so surprised by this. This is one of the things that caught me totally by surprise when I got diagnosed, because you don't realize that with people who don't have ADHD or, don't have this executive functioning struggle, their brains are they have a sense of like, oh, it's been about 10 minutes, which is wild to me. Like, I do not have that at all. And so, they've done tests on this. They've seen like press a button when it's 10 minutes. And if you're ADHD, people go like, oh, maybe now, like, I don't know, usually dependent on how busy they are or whatever. So it does have a plus side. It means that you can get into hyperfocus, which can be good if you know how to use it. So it does have that plus side. But yeah, very, very wild, very different way of working.
Right. And so that, like you said, so neurotypical, we can have a pretty good idea of, I bet it's been about a half an hour. Like, it's probably time to go do the next thing.
Still
and I can check the clock. Right? Yeah. Yeah, having that capacity, but also like to know, like we're saying, the flip side of where there's a positive of, if you get into that hyper focus and you can be working for a very long time and it doesn't feel any different maybe than, when you're dedicating 15 minutes or something. And so there's value as we think about, how we can, like lean into the benefits of any of our brains, right? And how they're set up to work with that, whether it's understanding your team members better, understanding yourself better. All of that is really great. What advice then is there, as far as if we take the time blindness as a key thing for someone? So if somebody is realizing, oh my gosh, yes, me, I don't have that. What do I do?
Yeah. I've just realized on this podcast. The biggest piece of advice I can give to you is to externalize time. So this is the biggest thing. So our brain doesn't have an internal time clock as much as it should. And so we need to find ways to externalize time. So it's not just, I have an alarm on my phone, because the truth is time ceases to exist. Then an alarm goes off. And if you have too many of them, you don't even remember which one it was and you cancel them. And so this is why I'm not a huge alarm person. What I recommend instead is thinking about a combination of different ways to see time. So put clocks around your house. You can make them look cool, put them up everywhere. Have a watch, or hang it in different places if you have sensory issues. And then have one of those visual timers where if you turn it on, it has, it shows you in red how much time is left. And then also just start using little natural timers. So, if you put something in the microwave, it's going to be about this much time. If you boil a cup of tea, it's going to be about this much time. If you brush your teeth, there's a little buzzer that goes off after a couple of minutes. So you can do some movement while you're brushing your teeth, like things like that. Just bring time into your world a little bit more.
And so I would assume kind of with this where it's not though that you can train your brain to just and now I know how long 15 minutes is because, right?
Unfortunately not. Yeah. Otherwise I wouldn't be here. I'd be somewhere very expensive on a beach somewhere. Be selling that.
And so I think knowing though that the goal isn't to fix that, right? In the way of I'm going to train my brain to do this now. Now that I know that that's not something that you can change. And so I think also just even, not fully survivorship bias here, but this sort of so much advice that's out in the world is to the point you're making, written by Neurotypical that's explaining how you can get better at this thing. But if they don't understand or have the type of brain that doesn't have that dopamine piece that is having this issue with time blindness, it just isn't going to, you can't be that same way, right? You can't read the article and say, well, I'm going to just they say I should do this thing and it'll be easy and eventually I will learn this. But if your brain's not wired for that, that's important to know. So you can just kind of remove the burden of feeling like there's something wrong in why you can't figure this thing out, to know that your brain just does this differently. And so these are some things that you can do externally to overcome that or whatnot.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I think, there is research into brain training because it is quite popular and it comes up a lot. And, what the research seems to indicate is that if you trained yourself, because, this is often comes from athleticism, to do something very specific a lot, you could probably train yourself to be better at doing that very specific thing. But it's not necessarily going to lead to a global shift in how your brain works. And so this is often what people don't get when we talk about brain training.
Right. So the transference of the skill, right? So if I know that it takes me just because you said athleticism, and I was thinking about this from this sort of fitness perspective, but I'm going to do however many push-ups and I know that takes me 5 minutes. And so I know that however many, 25 push-ups takes this long. Then I've got
you
that.
could definitely figure that out, but you're pretty much making yourself a natural timer at that point. So,
and it's based on but I'm not,
but you do have
when
to
I'm
do
doing
push-ups
something, right? When I'm going and doing something else, it's not like I now know exactly how long, 5 minutes is because I'm mentally doing push-ups.
Although I would love to see Melina just drop and give 20 because she's I need to know how long this queue is going to last.
5 minutes, making it happen. I know that's where somebody's potentially going 5 minutes to do 25 push-ups. What's wrong with you? But hey, progress, not perfection.
Yeah, I think it's amazing. I'm yeah, sure. Okay.
It could take me an hour. I don't know how long it's going to take. We've, my husband and I have been doing CrossFit and I'm training to I want to do a single pull-up, right? That is my goal in life at this point.
It's a good goal. I like that.
I've got a ways to go, but we're making progress. So, all right. So we talked about 2 of the 4 items within this kind of process that you found. Can you share the next one?
Yeah. So the next one is working memory, which is a big one. I think a lot of people don't understand how this works as well. I could say that a lot, but it's just crazy when you find out how your brain works. So
love it.
When we're talking about working memory, what it essentially means is, the way I like to describe it is, somebody says, okay, I need to replace a rug in my house. Seems pretty simple. If you're neurotypical, you go on whatever you're going to go on, eBay, you buy a new, you buy it used, whatever you do. Let's say you buy it used. So you go on eBay, you go on, whatever your version is in different countries, and you buy a rug. And then you get it and you deliver it, if you're ADHD, that process that seems so simple can be paralyzing, because when you actually break down what the steps are to do it, we're talking, you have to measure the space you have right now, which means you have to find a measuring tape, just for starters. You might have to even buy a measuring tape. Then you have to figure out how much space you have, how big is your current rug. Then you have to go and find something that's the same color, not get distracted, not even the same color, but like the same size, maybe the same color, whatever it does that you want. Maybe it needs to be, not have a hole in it or whatever. Then you have to get rid of the rug you already have. It can't sit in the corner of your room for a year. And I'm listening. Those of you, you can't put it in a different room. You have to get rid of it. Okay. So then we have to figure out how to dispose of a rug. What does that look like? Do we get a car? How does that work? Then say you buy the rug, you have to get it delivered, or you have to go pick it up, which is complicated. You have to talk to people. You have to negotiate. It could take multiple days of texting, which could really take your whole time up. Then you have to bring it in, unroll it, put it back down. So that's what it actually takes to buy a rug. And that's what I mean by working memory struggles. If you struggle to hold all of that information in your brain and use it in the same way as we could talk about spatial memory, like understand, okay, well, this and this, and then I would do this first and then this, you can end up very paralyzed when you're struggling with working memory struggles.
Yeah. And so all the different steps and kind of where they go together and keeping them moving along in the right place. So, what's the advice kind of for people in this space? If you're struggling with that working memory, what's the thing to do to overcome that?
So this is a system that I use called it's called the focus filter. So it helps you kind of go from overwhelmed to focus based on your tasks. Usually the biggest thing that I would say to you is you're going to need to have a hyperlink or a double click version of whatever that task is that has the subtasks. You can do it in a bullet journal. You just have to write down which page you put it on. You can do it in a Google Drive or a Notion doc. You just have to have a link that clicks to a separate page. But you need to have something where you can double click and you can see the broader version of the task. So if you own one of those really tiny little calendars that you can carry around that just says doctor's appointment and rug, it's not going to help you break through your working memory deficit.
And so it's a physical aspect of I can easily, so if it says rug and I click that and it'll say it'll have my list of steps of step 1, do this, step 2, do this. And I can go back and see, all right, I'm on step 5 and the next thing I'm supposed to do is to, rent a car to. Exactly.
Yeah. The principle of that system that I explain is it has to be like a tree. The different sections are all the branches of the tree. So if you click on something, it's okay, this is everything I have to do for it. These are all the steps. But eventually the tree has to come in and you've got the big list of rug, doctor's appointment, this, and you're kind of all connecting it again. Because again, working memory, if you say, oh, no worries, Skye, let me just find a random piece of paper and write a list of tasks for getting a rug on there, then, you're gonna come back to it and you're gonna be where's that list? I have no idea. So you need to have a central space where you store everything. And it takes a little bit of time to set it up, but once you get going, and this is the thing I love to remind people, once you get going on these systems, you've just supported your biggest struggles. So I'm not a huge ADHD is the superpower fan. I think ADHD has strengths and weaknesses. Executive functioning like this has strengths and weaknesses. The strengths are we're amazing at problem solving, creative thinking. But if we work on the weaknesses, if we're running around trying to figure out how to buy a rug, we don't really have time and energy for those things. I mean, maybe we'll pull a rabbit out of a hat and figure out how to get someone who'll do the whole thing, remove it, bring it back all at once. But maybe we'll start a business to do that. You can see how the mind works with ADHD.
Yes. But I mean, the rabbit out of the hat, that's where TaskRabbit, I'm sure, is one of those great aspects too, right?
Yeah.
Of take care of this.
We don't have it in New Zealand. So I'm endlessly jealous. And I always tell my clients to use something like that. They have it.
Right. And when you can potentially then, so knowing when it's better to outsource something versus having to hold it in your own space feels like it would be really valuable in that way as well, right? So if it's reasonably affordable enough to have this taken care of, where if you would get distracted actually going grocery shopping and buying the wrong things. If you had a list of stuff that you were wanting to get, if you were able to set up in an app or some sort of like recurring subscription that like your food just shows up every week so that you don't have to even think about that.
Yeah. The best person to do a task is not you. That is the person we want to do most tasks if we can help it.
I mean, in general, I'm on board. I like to outsource all those sorts of tasks and things. So awesome. So I was trying to remember when you were talking. I can't remember if this thing that has come to mind for me is something that you said in the pre-conversation we had a couple of weeks ago, or if it was something else I had read or whatnot outside of this. But so something to do with if you make a note about something, like if it was, and like rug isn't going to be the right word here as I'm trying to remember what it was, but essentially if you make the note about a thing, you don't necessarily remember why you were making the note about the thing, like all the different aspects of the context of what it was. And so I'm remembering now, and I think it was a conversation I was having with my husband, Aaron, about this, like after we were having our conversation, and something he might have read, right? But like that it had to do with, and the thing in my brain, which is so weird, but if you write raisins
yep.
on it, and then it's saying, and so maybe it's because he had watched some of your content too, and it came from you, but it was like raisins specifically. And then you don't know if the note was to go buy raisins or like that you want to go look for your California raisins action figure little like doll thing you had when you were a kid. And so like the context doesn't tie to the note.
Or do we grow something that makes raisins? Do we want to start a raisin? Like, what do we, like, it could be anything. Yeah.
Yeah. So did that in some way come from some of your content, and is it tied in here?
The principle definitely. I don't know what a raisin action figure is. So that one it didn't come from me, but yeah, it is very much like the detail. When we're talking about working memory, we're talking about detail. Problem is, can't get overwhelmed by detail. So you can't write a list that contains all the small stuff. So if you get raisin on a list, then I would expect to see a double click option or some way to then go in and say, okay, what this is, like, this is an action figure. It's very hard to find. You're going to have to do ABC, things like that.
I know. I feel like action figure was maybe a bit much, but it's like, I know the California raisins were like these characters that helped to sell raisins in the like 80s or something around here. So they're like 4 dancing raisins. So it's maybe not an action figure as much as some sort of doll or something. Who knows?
Yeah, but it's perfectly reasonable that it's written on a list, like an ADHD list. My lists, I have so many things on a list that I actually often recommend that people have a section. It gets deep when we talk about this in our program. But essentially you think about it as like a tree, and there's a trellis that you like link to the tree called the idea trellis. And that's where the idea of like, do I want a raisin figurine? Like, like that kind of stuff goes in there, because otherwise it's going to like choke the tree because there's going to be so many ideas in there. So we try and move that to a different section.
Yes, that's I think in similar way of where I talk about the not yet folders and things, yes. Right? So
yeah, 100%.
Being able to, because again, we all get distracted. Our brains are wired for that, no matter what, right? But so to know that, like, oh, I saw this article and like, that's interesting. I should go read about that. And like, maybe I should read about it, but not right now. Maybe that's like something to do a week from now when I'm working on and going to need that. And so having a place that's set up where, you can go save it. And so like I've got, whether it's a Trello board or a folder in my email inbox that I can just say, when it's time, I know where they are.
It'll come back to me in the right moment.
Yeah. And I can go read it again and then, deal with it at that point. So, perfect. Okay. Well, that was a really weird tangent. And I feel like I'm going to end up I always love when listeners will reach out and say like, oh my gosh, I was absolutely laughing at your ridiculousness as you were talking about California raisins. So, please, world, send me a note to make fun of me.
Send me a raisin.
Yeah. Hey, raisins are great. I'm team raisin. That actually made me think of so I get distracted here, but this oatmeal raisin cookies are way better than oatmeal and chocolate chip. I don't know why anybody would have an oatmeal and chocolate chip cookie, but
we have something in New Zealand called Anzac cookies. I don't know if you guys have them, but they're like a type of oatmeal cookie that, yeah. Anyway, look it up. You'll probably be like, what is that? And chocolate fish. Those are the two things. You guys don't have chocolate fish, which are, yeah, they're like chocolate shaped candy with chocolate on the outside. Anyway.
Love it. Hey, so, well, now that we've had many a good tangent along the way, let's go to our fourth item that you like to talk about. So we had the dopamine dial transition and things there. We talked about the time blindness. We talked about that working memory. What's our fourth aspect?
Which is, the fourth aspect is transition times and set switching. And we've kind of touched on this a little bit already in terms of our discussion of the Pomodoro. But essentially, set switching is just the concept that you need to give yourself a moment. One of the things that we find in research with ADHD is something called the bleed effect. And what that means, it's not as dramatic as it sounds. It just means that when you switch between tasks, you'll have a little bit of a bleed between the tasks. You're not going to be able to just go, I always like to use this example of like, if you have a meeting and then between meeting 1 and meeting 2, you have an hour and you're like, right, in that hour, I'm going to get work done. And then you don't. And you're like, what happened? It's because you struggle with transition time. So your brain just goes, okay, I have 15 minutes to defrag from that meeting. And then I have I need to take a break and get a coffee and da-da-da. Then I have 15 minutes to get prepped for the next meeting. So I really only have 15 minutes to work on this entire project. So I really only had time to open it. And in the end, I did something else. So, this is kind of one of the reasons why I recommend changing it. And there's actually a really amazing system called manager versus maker time, which was created not for neurodiversity specifically, but it's a very similar concept, this idea of, try and give yourself maker time, try and give yourself manager time, try and chunk similar types of tasks together so that you can reduce your transition time between separate tasks.
So in that way, if you have a bunch of meetings, say if you have team members and you're doing one-on-ones or something, to squish them in together and to say I do this call and then the next call, it's this multiple calls, but they're all doing the same type of function. And so you can kind of run through those. And then, you have a transition before you do, more creative type thinking that you get to do in the afternoon or however it makes sense.
Exactly. And we go into it in the program, about energy and when you should do things based on your energy. And obviously, how many back-to-back meetings you have before you need a break. But essentially, it's about combining similar tasks together in order to actually literally get more time in your week. Once you start doing this, people get hours and hours and hours back, and they're always really surprised.
Awesome. I love that. So it feels like a good transition then as we think about ourselves in business. And like you said, you work with people in, executive roles. So when you're the manager and whatnot, what are the tips that you give to people just as a place to start, something to be thinking about? We've of course been covering them along the way, but if you think about this now in that work setting, whether it's for you as a manager, if you're managing someone that is neurodiverse or someone who's working, just whatever the top level advice, what comes to mind for you, what would you want to share with the audience?
Number one, put clocks in your meeting rooms. Don't expect, if you're mad that somebody takes too long and you don't have a clock that they can see when they stand up to give a presentation, that's on you guys. Come on. Let's put some clocks up. And then, it's a bit of a funny one. But and then on a more serious note, I think it's just about understanding how much flexibility is available in the business, and then what people are going to need, because usually what you find is the most helpful. And, there's a reason that, people who run businesses are often the ones who need the most flexibility themselves. They're like, I have to work from all these different places, because often they can be neurodiverse. Like I said, most people I work with are the boss or, an executive, and they have ADHD. So understanding, okay, it's not to say that that person isn't going to work, because everyone's going to get a great, job done. That's exactly what we're doing. But they might want to put headphones on. They might want to go to a coffee shop to get particular deep work done. If you have an open plan office and it doesn't really lend itself to deep work, they might want to start a bit later or start a bit earlier. Maybe they like the bustle, maybe they like the quiet, so just being aware that when people ask for these different commendations, usually what they're doing, if they're, tied to the goal that you as a business have, is that they are attempting to figure out how to match the optimal stimulation for their brain to get work done.
And with that in mind, do you have any, tips for people if they are needing to go have this conversation with, manager, HR, boss, teams? Like, what are the tips for that?
100%. I get asked this question all of the time. So the tip that I have for everybody who's doing this is to understand what is the goal that this organization wants from you specifically. Make sure you know what that is. And then come in with the energy of, I want to reach this goal. And I know that this shift is going to help me reach this goal faster, more effectively, blah, 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 that kind of thing. And so then people are coming with a better understanding. If you just say, I have this thing and it means that I need to do this, that doesn't really, and obviously it's hard. We want people to help. And sometimes they just genuinely do care. But the easiest way to get people to come on board with you, and this is both if you're a boss who's thinking about the goals of their, employees or contractors, and an employee or contractor thinking about the goals of their boss, is to connect it to the vision that they have.
Definitely. This is why I use the same framework for pricing and sales as I do for change management, right? Because you want to understand what someone values in the way that you present the information to them, and to know that there are many things that are all true at the same time, and you can focus on something that is going to be important to that person in that moment to help move things along, even if it's not the most important thing to you as to why you are asking, right? But being thoughtful about that can help you get more buy-in when you are looking to get those accommodations. And I think, a big lesson just for everybody, whether you're the boss, whether you're a team member, or like you said, a vendor partner or anybody else, is to know that no matter what your brain's got going on, not everyone is exactly like you. And so the thing that works for you isn't going to be necessary or work for everyone, whether that is that you as the boss have ADHD or members of the team or anything else. And so just to know that there's kind of this like openness to understanding what's going to help someone. And as long as it's not negatively impacting other people, then, there's, value in trying to find a way to make it work.
100%.
Perfect. So the last thing, I think, so we talked about understanding your own self, if we've got this going on for us. We talked about if you are the boss, and going in and asking for your own accommodations if you need them. I think the last piece that people might be curious about has to do with if you're, if this is sort of a managing up. So if your boss has ADHD, whether they know or don't, what are the tips you have for the employee of an ADHD manager?
So similar thing applies, talking about the idea of understanding what their goals are and aligning it with you. So if you ask for things, sometimes you're asking for things for them. So sometimes you're saying, hey, could we get if you come with a brand new idea that's different from all the ideas that we had before, there's a 7-day runway on that shift. Could we have, it's just, I want to make sure that I'm being efficient with my time and I'm helping you reach this goal, which is my goal. And this is going to help. So again, you're going to have to ask questions. I think understanding the struggles that people have as well. So thinking, okay, I can't probably ask this person about something and expect them to remember it if they didn't write it down. I have an EA who I love. Amazing. And so, often in a meeting, I'll be like, can you put this on my list? You know what I mean? She's the one putting it on my list. Sometimes I'll look at my list and I'll be like, oh, yes, that thing, or if it needs to get urgent, can you put it in my calendar? These are kinds of things that often happen. And so these little shifts, are going to be so understanding working memory struggles, time blindness struggles, dopamine shifts, and then asking for what you want, but connecting it to their vision.
I love it. wonderful tips and advice. And of course, I'm sure that there are so many people now that are so excited to learn more, to follow you, to connect. What's their best path to do so?
So you can find me at unconventionalorganisation.com. That's my website. There you can find access to articles. You can find this amazing Go From Overwhelmed to Focused dashboard that you can download that will help you just do everything you need to. We love to give it away for free. I don't want anyone to feel overwhelmed when they're neurodiverse. And we also have the podcast. So our podcast is called the ADHD Skills Lab. We go deep on the research, fully nerdy, and we interview wonderful people about their own experiences and how they've overcome their ADHD and worked with it in different ways. So it's a good time.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for that. We'll, of course, have links in the show notes for everyone. And just thank you so much again, Skye, for joining me today. It's been delightful to chat with you.
Yeah, it's been great. Thank you so much.
Thank you again to Skye Waterson for joining me on the show today. What got your brain buzzing in today's conversation? For me, I love knowing these 4 concrete areas where ADHD brains are different from neurotypical brains, and that they go beyond just being distracted easily, which is what I think people tend to use as their only classification for ADD or ADHD. And since we all get distracted, I think that makes it easy for people to write it off and feel like others should just try harder or something. But there's so much more to it than that. It's so helpful to understand these tangible differences of what's going on in the brain with proven tips that someone can apply for themselves and others to be more effective. Knowing that there isn't a dopamine hit when starting that task is really important, or understanding about time blindness, or how working memory is different for someone with ADHD, or how to approach transition times and set switching. If you aren't accounting for that bleed effect and stacking the workload of the day accordingly for yourself or others, it could lead to a much less effective day than if you do know about it and plan properly. Again, what I really love about these tips and insights is that they can be super simple to accommodate, and for the most part, they shouldn't have a negative impact on anyone else. And likely they can be positive for most people, that there's some benefit in them, especially, that bleeding time effect and the way you stack your days. So playing off of Skye's comment about adding clocks on the walls in your meeting rooms, that shouldn't have a negative impact on anybody else. And knowing that time blindness is real for those with ADHD. If you have a team member who has ADHD and you've been struggling with meetings staying on time, what cues can you collectively put into place to help everyone stay on track? And know that they aren't trying to do anything to derail the group, but in understanding this is a natural tendency for them and finding ways for the whole group to have permission to be supportive and not feel like it would be rude to interrupt or whatnot is really key. Communication is important all around, whether you're asking for an accommodation for your employer or wanting to let your team know how to best work together or anything else. And understanding the science behind our brains is a great foundation to make that communication possible. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Skye today. I know I did, and I told her after we were done that I think this has the potential to be one of our most popular episodes because I know how often people ask and think about this. So I love that we were able to make it really applicable in all sorts of ways. With that in mind, I would love to hear what resonated most for you. What stood out for you when listening to the episode? Is there anything you're going to apply right away? Did you have a revelation about yourself or someone you've worked with? We would love to hear about it, so please come share with us on social media. You'll find me as the Brainy Biz pretty much everywhere and as Melina Palmer on LinkedIn. There are links in the show notes to make it easy, as well as links to my top related past episodes and books, ways to get in touch with Skye and myself, and more. It's all waiting for you in the app you're listening to and at thebrainybusiness.com/515. And thank you again to Skye Waterson for joining me on the show today. It was a delight to chat with and learn from you. Join me Tuesday for another Brainy episode of the Brainy Business Podcast. It's going to be a lot of fun. You don't want to miss it. Until then, thanks again for listening and learning with me. And remember to be thoughtful.
Thank you for listening to the Brainy Business Podcast. Melina offers virtual strategy sessions, workshops, and other services to help businesses be more brain-friendly. For more free resources, visit thebrainybusiness.com.